we are really excited about our webinar today, and we have a great panel for you. And so I'm going to get to that in just a second. But first, I wanted to talk to you about our focus on live well and lead well at AASA. This has been something we have been focusing on now for over a year, because we understand that superintendents across the country have been really struggling and really looking for some solid tools to help them through what has been one of the most difficult times in the history of public schools. And so we know that the divisions are of a historic nature, and we also know that leadership has never been more important than it is right now. And so to all of the public school leaders who are joining us today, I want to start by just saying thank you. Thank you for serving. Thank you for leading. Thank you for loving every child, every adult who is in your organization. You are making an enormous difference. And I believe that this webinar today is going to be of great benefit to you. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to introduce our panel. And this is an amazing panel. And so we're being joined by Shawn Achor. All of you have probably heard Shawn, and you have read his books. After 12 years at Harvard, Shawn is becoming one of the world's leading experts on the connection between happiness and success. And I can think of no better time to be talking about his work than right now. And so I know you're going to enjoy learning from Shawn. We're also being joined by a couple of practitioners who know Shawn well and know the work well. Joel Peterson is the superintendent of the Cardinal Community School District in Iowa, and Joel was the 2019-2020 Iowa Superintendent of the Year. We're also being joined by Lisa Hagel. She recently joined the Michigan Leadership Institute as executive director. She served in education for nearly 30 years, most recently as the superintendent of the Genesee Intermediate School District, where she served for 10 years. And so we're just really excited to have Lisa, to have Joel, and to have Shawn with us today. And if you would go to the next slide, Tammy, our topic for the today is going to be how superintendents, how leaders can be a part of bringing our communities back together after the divisions we have seen of the last several years. And I think this quote is such a great way to start. Alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. And that is so true. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shawn, and he is going to kick us off. And we're excited about the time. Shawn, thanks a lot for being with us today, and it's all yours, buddy.
Paul, thank you so much. I'm so excited to get to join you, and I'm here with two of my heroes, with Joel and Lisa, who have brought this research alive in a way that I couldn't even imagine as a researcher. So I am so grateful that all of you have joined to get to hear from them here today. Both of my parents are educators. My mom was a high school English teacher for over 30 years. I grew up not only seeing how much they cared about their students, but also the trials and the sufferings that they went through in the midst of trying to raise a family while also caring for thousands of other families, right? In the midst of trying to deal with some of the challenges that they were dealing with within the school systems, with parents, with administration, with all the challenges that come along with this type of position. When I first got into taking positive psychology research that we were doing first at Harvard and then we were bringing out to companies, our hope was to bring this into the schools, given how I'd grown up. And when I started doing this, my mom said, just don't waste their time. I'm like, thanks, Mom. Wow, that was a great way to start this career.
I love it.
But because she had seen so many flavor of the month, so many changes that were supposed to solve everything, that was actually more exhausting in the end. Today, what I'm hopeful for is to be able to pour some of this research and these case studies into you here today to not only fill you up and to feel not only hope, but to have some tools that you can use, but also things that you can walk away with that will not only be helpful within the school districts, but within our families as well. We're going to start almost at a general level because of order of operations. Before we can get into the tactical, we have to clearly understand the challenges we're in. And I think that while we realize we're in a challenge, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about recently, I was just thinking about it last night, is, there's been reports coming out that math scores are the lowest in 2 decades, and the drop has been one of the largest that we've ever seen, and the reading scores have dropped as well. It's yet another education crisis, as dubbed by the media and many of our education experts. The problem is that we're continually within a crisis. We go from crisis to crisis. And what happens in a crisis is that we ignore everything else that might have previously been a priority to deal with a new crisis. So when we got this with COVID and with the new educational challenges, when it comes up with a war in Eastern Europe or inflationary challenges, what happens in the midst of that is we're continually scanning for the threats we need to eliminate. And our hope is that within our districts, through your leadership, somehow we're going to solve all these problems, and then we'll be happier. The research that I've been doing over the course of the past nearly 2 decades is showing us that approach, while loving, is misguided. Because what we're finding is that the order of operations is backwards. What we're finding is that every time our brain has a success, our brain changes the goalpost of what success looks like. Once we solve one crisis or deal with one crisis, or one's brought to our attention, maybe even before solving it, we're off to the next crisis as well, which leads to not only threat detection, which we've seen with the Marines I've been working with out at Camp Pendleton, but also to a crisis mentality where we're constantly scanning for the deficits, as opposed to being able to use a growth mindset to identify what are the things that are working and be able to use those as well. I'm studying a field called positive psychology, which took a different approach to psychology. For those of you that know me, what we looked at originally in psychology was depression and disorder. And we thought if we studied them enough, maybe we could find a way of getting everyone back up to being quote unquote normal again. But normal was just statistically average. And what we were finding was you can study gravity forever without learning how to fly. As we're trying to deal with these challenges, what happens is when we have a crisis mentality, we're studying gravity over and over again. But what we started to do is we started to look to see why it was in schools with low socioeconomics, with all the challenges that Joel and Lisa's school districts have been through economically, emotionally, in terms of the jobs that are around there, racism, lack of funding. In the midst of all of those things, we're finding that for some of the students, differently from last year, their scores were rising against the tide, which means they had the same genes, they had the same environment, but something else had changed. When we study them, we look to see, is there something we could replicate? A mindset shift or a behavioral shift that we could then import to other students or other educators, other leaders, or other superintendents, or to the parents to find some way of being able to get those gains to continue. In positive psychology, we study the positive side of the curve. We're trying to figure out what it is that causes someone to be so high above the curve so that we can then replicate that across the board. Our goal with the work we've been doing in positive psychology in the school systems is not how do we move people up to being average, but how might we move the entire average up in our schools and our communities worldwide. But to come back to that idea of order of operations, and I love the live well, lead well that Paul has been such an incredible champion for and going all around the country last year talking about, is that it reminds us of the order of operations. We want to solve these problems for our kids because we love them. We want the best for them. But we assume that if we could immediately, see a problem like math scores are down, one of the articles I was reading, one of the educators said, great, we just need to double or triple down on math in our schools. Well, if we could do that, we would have already been doing that, right? And that comes at a cost, right? I know I can't do math 3 times as much, right? I have 2 little kids. That's not, any educator would know that that's not how learning and encoding and memory works, right? In fact, if you want to get somebody to learn more, we have to be able to work on the things that are precursors to that. The belief that change is possible, the belief that they can learn, feeling a psychological safety and connection with their leaders, with their teachers, with their parents, finding optimism and hope and gratitude in the midst of those challenges, we find when we research it dramatically improves those outcomes, which we'll get to hear from the incredible stories from Joel and Lisa in just a moment. But before that can occur, before we can talk about the social emotional learning for the kids, we have to talk about the social emotional support for the leaders. And that starts with you. That starts with the superintendents that are trying to lead this. We know that they're one part of the system, but they're a part that seems to touch so many other parts. And if we're going to actually prioritize social and emotional learning, we have to give that support to the educators, and we have to give that support to the people that are leading us through this challenge, which is why Lisa and Joel are such heroes to me, because not only are they dealing with their own life challenges like we all do, Paul is in the same boat as well, but then they actually care about other people. So in this research, I've covered two main tracks in my career, and I'm going to pass it back over to you, Paul. But the first track was this idea that we kept thinking that if we work harder, we'd be successful, then we'd be happier. That's the mentality that we saw within the companies that we worked with. And we've worked with nearly a third of the Fortune 100 companies now, with NASA, with NFL, with the Pentagon, with Marines, with school children and shanty towns in South Africa. We keep thinking that if we work hard and solve these problems, then we're all going to be happier. The problem is every time we solve a problem, we change the goalpost of what success looks like. The brain's designed to do that. What we found, though, is if you flip the order around, if we were able to raise levels of happiness in the midst of the challenge, in the midst of the challenges that Lisa was dealing with in Flint, right? The challenges that Joel was dealing with graduation rates and literacy problems, right? In the midst of those challenges, if we found some way of raising social connection, optimism, gratitude, not only amongst the students, but amongst the educators and the leaders as well, we find that almost every single business and educational outcome we know how to test for starts to rise dramatically. The human brain is designed to work best at positive. Dopamine not only raises our levels of pleasure, it turns on all the learning centers in the brain. Part of what we've been doing with this research is trying to convince not the educators who already get this, but the parents that if you focus on social and emotional learning, it will lead to the outcomes that they want. For they want their kids to be happy, but they assume to be happy, they have to first be an investment banker, right? They first have to get a degree, right? And I work with investment bankers. That doesn't work. I work with Harvard students. That doesn't work. Tiger parenting was the idea that if we push you really hard and you get into a great school, then you'll be really happy with me, right? And it never worked. We found that 80% of the Harvard students were going through work debilitating depression, because they hadn't learned some of the tools that they needed. They had learned languages, math, and reading, but they didn't know how to deal with the fact that they might have been the top 1%, but now half of them are below average once they get into the new environment. How do they deal with challenge and change and continue to have an optimistic belief system as they move forward? So the first part of my career was focused on this idea that happiness is an incredible advantage. We're going to go more detail into that in a little bit about how when you're positive, when the students are positive, the educators are positive, teachers stay longer, they want to come work at your school, the students' test scores rise dramatically, we live longer, our symptoms are less acute once they get out to the working world. Every business outcome we tested for through Harvard Business School rises dramatically when that student's brain is more positive. We see it with doctors, we see it with on Wall Street, and we see it with educators as well. But the second half of my career comes back to what Paul started us with here today, which is the idea is if we try to do this alone, we're only going to achieve small potential. Big potential is what happens when we try to do this with one another. I know so many superintendents that are superheroes who have tried to put all of this burden over the past 2-3 years on their shoulders, but it's too much. There's no way anyone can do that, despite how much love we have for the people that are around us. What I found was the same in positive psychology. I thought if you gave data to people, then they just change, right? It's a self-help approach to happiness and success. What we found was that's not the case. Today, we're going to talk about one of the positive psychology interventions we've done called the Orange Frog, which was a parable-based training where we came in and brought research around positive psychology to groups of people instead of to individuals, so that together they were creating positive change. Together they were creating positive habits, so that they knew that they weren't alone. In the midst of this research, what we found was that hills, when you look at them, these researchers out in Virginia found if you look at a hill by yourself, your brain will show you a picture of a hill that looks 20 to 30% steeper than if you have that same participant look at a hill of the same height, standing next to someone who they're told is going to climb the hill with them. The inclusion of another person climbing an obstacle changes the perception of the geometry of the challenge in front of them. And in a host of studies that we've done since, everywhere from Google to Harvard to these school districts in the poorest county in Iowa to Flint, Michigan, to the work we've been doing in South Africa, what we've been finding over and over again is that happiness can't be self-help, right? Social emotional learning can't be something that somebody does alone. In fact, if we're going to have any type of change, we need to find some way of enhancing the ecosystem, expanding power out, and defending it together. So today we're going to weave back and forth between how we can share this research with you that might be helpful for you, but also how at the same time we could be expanding and enhancing the ecosystem around us. So Paul, let me bring it back over to you because I just
that's awesome, Shawn. I could listen to you all day, so I'm already happier.
Absolutely.
So this is I think the research is so powerful, and I love how you're applying this research across the country. So I think a great place for us to go next is to use your work around Orange Frog, and to talk about how that's worked in 2 different places. And we have 2 amazing leaders with us today who've done this work on the ground. So why don't we talk about the Orange Frog, Shawn, and then hear from our 2 leaders about how that work has benefited their schools, because I think this can be informative as leaders around the country are working to bring our communities back together. And we can't do that work until we've also taken care of our staff and students. And those folks are all really hurting. So why don't we take it to the work of Orange Frog next?
That's a perfect place. So this is, as I mentioned, one of the toolkits that we've been utilizing that might be helpful for you post a session like this one. You don't have to run the Orange Frog intervention to get a lot of these benefits. There are parts of it you can pick out and choose, but we learned so much doing this that I wanted to share the experience as we've been doing with schools across the country. So I was working with Nationwide Insurance. We were able to raise the revenue on their teams by 50% in an 18-month period of time. They were so happy and making so much more money using this research that they said, we've got to get this into the schools. So they were able to fund us taking the research that we were doing out of these companies around positive psychology and bring it first to Joel to see if we could replicate these types of changes, not in the work environment, but within an educational environment. When I started this career, I thought that if I did enough research and data and had the spreadsheets and could show you that productivity rises by 31% when the brain is positive over negative, neutral, or stressed, everyone would be like, great, I'm just going to be productive today. I'll just be optimistic, right? Or if doctors are more positive, they're 19% faster, more accurate at coming up with the correct diagnosis. Just do it. Right? We've got the data. The data alone wasn't creating the persuasive changes that we needed long-term. 2 things were necessary for that to happen: ritual or habit, but it had to be sustained by an ecosystem. The second part is what I learned through the Orange Frog program. The Orange Frog originally was a parable I'd written about a frog named Spark, who is green, has this orange spot, hates having this orange spot because it makes him different. But then as the course of this 10-minute little parable continues, he lives on this island with these other ponds, and every year the island gets hit by a storm, so they have to rebuild their homes every year. So in the course of this, Spark realizes that when he does these positive things on the island, he becomes more orange, and then realizes that it's not only advantageous, it's contagious as well. So he then goes around to the other ponds before the storm comes, trying to get them to become orange as well. It basically makes a grid, like a workaholic pond, a pleasure pond, which is not as much fun as it sounds, like a disengaged pond, and then this 4th pond. Over the course of it, the frogs start to work together. They become orange. They're able to build their houses up in the trees together. So when the storm comes, they don't have to keep rebuilding. I obviously didn't know that the pandemic was coming, but had I known, this is the story I would have wanted to share in parable form of what we're seeing in positive psychology, which is that when people did these individual habits with one another instead of alone, that not only did the advantage rise, it created a virtuous cycle with the ecosystem, and the entire ecosystem started to improve as well. That's what we learned with Orange Frog. Orange Frog is a 1 to 2 day positive psychology intervention that we use, where we start with that parable, because people are not going to read my book before coming to a training, right? And it's something they could share in the classrooms as well. And some of the teachers have actually turned it into plays that kids have acted out at the school, which is really fun. But what happens is they come in with teams, with groups of people, and they they've read the parable, so they have a common language. Then they together hear that they're dealing with similar challenges, but also want things to become more positive. In the midst of this, they start to shift away from deficit mindset to a growth mindset. While they're doing this, we start to talk about the positive habits that we've been studying that bolster a change and the impact that it has upon their well-being and their kids' test scores. Then they look at their work routines and they find one that they can work on together and they change it. So post the session, there's a habit change, but it's done in a community-based instead of individual. What we learned was that when people receive data with one another instead of alone, they hear it in a completely different way. They're not the only ones hearing it. And the hill of changing that environment or dealing with that next crisis, that hill drops by 20 to 30% because they're not climbing that hill alone. And the resulting impact is what we've seen at places like where Joel and Lisa have been working and with other superintendents around the country as well. So I would love to, Joel, maybe we'll start with you just because we did start with you. And then I would love to hear how that evolved when we got out to Lisa as well. So Joel, maybe you could start.
Yeah, thank you, Shawn. And I just want to say to everyone that's listening, thank you for the work that you're doing. Just appreciate all of you. I know it's tough right now, but I think this is a great webinar, hopefully that you're going to take some time to listen to. And I would argue, if you're struggling, you're looking for something, hey, try it. In 2015, we went for it. Try gratitude for 21 days. It'll make a huge difference. I also like what Shawn said, kind of as a theme is, and I use kind of the phrase, information is not transformation. We can keep giving information, but the orange frog really, I think, helps with transformation. Shawn and I have joked about that. I saw that bright orange obnoxious book in Barnes and Nobles in 2010. And I read it, and I actually read your book. So I don't know, Shawn, one of 10 people that read the book, right? Or whatever. So just kidding, Shawn, just kidding. So, but the point is that I read this and we started doing some things with positive psychology, but it was hard to kind of ripple out and get everybody involved. And then in 2015, we had the opportunity to be the first Orange Frog district in the United States. And it just made everything come alive. It was fun. It was easy to understand. It was something we could build on. Teachers started having activities in their classrooms, and bus drivers started giving notes to people. So I think for us, it built community. It built common language in a fun way. Many of the activities that we do in our schools don't even cost money. Certainly there was some investment early on, but many of the things we do don't cost money. And I think that's really, really powerful too. I just think it's made a huge difference. And I would tell people over these last 7 years, we haven't had any Fortune 500 company come in and create all these jobs. We have some of the same challenges we did before, but we start to see challenges differently. We start to see what's right and not only what was wrong. And when I started there in 2010, there was a lot of great people, but the focus was on everything that won't work. Our kids can't learn. And the outcomes have been amazing by just changing kind of the way we do business. And Orange Frog has helped us change our culture, the way we do things, and for it to only continue to grow. And we're doing some stuff, doing some more things with parents now through Happiness 360. It's just been really amazing. And I've been able to watch the work that Lisa's doing too. And it's, I don't care if you're in Iowa or Michigan or Arizona. I was in Ohio just a week ago in a challenging situation where economic downturn. It resonates and it gives people hope in a time where we need this desperately in our schools. Our teachers need this. I think we forgot why we got in education in the first place was to help kids. And Orange Frog is allowing us to I just think, refocus. And it's been really, really beneficial and helpful in our school. So Lisa, I'll let you kind of jump in. I know it's been a
could I ask you a quick question, Joel, before we move on? I always think people learn from story too. So tell us, like, maybe a couple of things you've done in your district that you think have really been helpful in this journey. Just a couple of quick stories from Iowa, I think would help our listeners.
Yeah, one of the quick things is we had a buildings and grounds director that started writing poetry after going through the Orange Frog. And if you met this particular gentleman, you would not think he was a poet. And it became every morning he would write a little poem and send it out through email just to kind of bring some positivity. And then I didn't realize it was making a difference until one day when he didn't write a poem, and we had multiple emails asking, "Where's the poem? We need your poem this morning." So we allow people to think differently. It gives them permission to maybe find more positivity. And I think that's another great thing we We talk a lot about positive outliers, embracing positive outliers. We're a rural school district growing in Iowa. We'll talk about a thing that doesn't sound right for a rural school district growing, because we have had so many kids enroll into our school based off our culture. Another story would be, as we just identify sparks around our school. We have just different people that have a spark designation, and we know those are going to be people that are going to raise us up. I would love for Lisa to share her conscious acts of kindness story, because that, Paul, is a real powerful one on Shawn's research too. So just a few, and at the end of the day, guys, I would just encourage you, if you're struggling, try some of these strategies. Try one strategy. I would say gratitudes, and you'll just be amazed at how things can change. It's just such powerful work. And I know Shawn, just from talking to him, how much he cares about getting this research into schools. It's just been really amazing, this journey. And I can't wait to see where we're at even 5 years from now, because we know that Orange Frog and the work of positive psychology is not going to leave Cardinal anytime soon, because it's become embedded in our work.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
You're making such a difference there with that community. You have turned it around, and I just commend your leadership there.
Thank you.
So I too want to thank AASA for sharing this information with the broader community, and commend all of the leaders for the work that they're doing with children and families. I know the days are tough, and when you begin to feel that overwhelming surge, you do have to reflect on why we're here, because you are making a tremendous difference with not only your staff, but your students and your families. So as Paul said, I've had the privilege of being in education for 35 years, 17 as a superintendent. I recently, this past year, transitioned into the executive director for Michigan Leadership Institute, which in Michigan, I am now working with all aspiring administrators who would like to be a superintendent. So my role is to develop, deploy, and support outstanding leaders who aspire to be a superintendent. And then when there are vacancies in Michigan, we work with the board to find that right fit person to fit in the community. So we are listening to parents, students, staff, and then the superintendent to fit them in the right communities. So talking about what you say and do matters is one of the tools and the principles of Orange Frog. And it fits so perfectly in the situation that I'm in now, and making a true difference across the superintendency in Michigan. So we did have the privilege to start Orange Frog Happiness Advantage at Genesee ISD about 6 years ago. And that was during the Flint water crisis. And we had about 2,000 staff at that time at Genesee ISD who needed a tremendous uplifting, if you will. And so when I learned about the program, that was my first goal, if you will, is let's find something that is positive that I can share with the staff. Although that was a great goal, I sorely, I guess, underrated the impact of this program, because organically, what we were able to do with the positive psychology principles, the habits, the routines of Happiness Advantage, the research really took a role of its own inside of our organization. It became so much more than an orange frog named Spark and the color and so forth. Organically, it transformed the culture of our organization, what the parents believed. We support 21 districts, 83,000 students in Genesee County, and we're connected to all kinds of organizations. So for our students, staff, the administrative team, everyone, it just became transformative, not only in their work life, but in their life at home with their own families. So for us to say it was uplifting personally was just a small factor of this program. You know, as people are watching and considering what the impact of happiness and this program can do, we know that happiness is different for everyone, and it really improves your resiliency, your creativity, your engagement. And as we start these roles, you're so highly engaged and creative. But what this does is to be able to keep your mindset in a positive place. It really keeps your performance at the highest level possible as a superintendent, and helps you as a role model for others who are always watching you. Because in your position, you really don't have that luxury, as you know, Paul, to have a down day. People are always watching you. And so the higher level that you're functioning at, no matter how you're feeling internally, if you can keep your mindset in that positive, content, engaged place by using the strategies, by using the habits, by integrating those into your daily routines, it really does help you as a leader to stay more focused and in tune to why you entered this calling from the beginning. And it doesn't get you lost in all the other noise, if you will, that is just pounding down on you every day. It also helps you share that with parents, you know, why they matter. It reminds you to listen to them. It reminds you to listen to maybe what they are saying, and it gives you tools on how to use negative social scripts and change them into maybe positive social scripts that will help your district become a warmer, safer environment for the staff, the students, and parents, who, as we know, you know, where there's just divisions. It doesn't matter where you go at this point. There's divisions in our communities. And so this program or these strategies not only help internally, but they help externally in our communities.
Well, one of the things too, maybe Shawn can allude to this, I think is important that sometimes gets lost a little bit in this work, is that whether you implement Orange Frog, which I highly encourage, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have problems in your district. It doesn't mean that things aren't going to happen. There are things waiting for me in my inbox right now. But what it does is it fundamentally changes how we see things. Do we see solutions quicker? And when we get to a positive mindset, it just doesn't seem, as Shawn talked about, how high the hill is. It seems like we were able at our school district to solve things quicker, and we get a little bit past some of that mindless complaining that doesn't help our environment. So I don't know, Shawn, sometimes I think it gets lost that, oh, you're just saying everything's going to be perfect and everybody's going to be happy and jumping around and all that. And I think that there is a time for the high fives and the hooper and hollering, but there are different happiness styles. But overall, when you're in a positive mindset, you just tend to see solutions easier. And I think that sometimes gets lost a little bit in this work too, Paul, is that people are like, oh, you're just telling me I have to be happy all the time. And I don't know, Shawn, I just think that's important, as I've went through this 7-year journey, that gets lost sometimes in this story too.
Yeah, I actually don't get to study people that are happy all the time, because that's a disorder, right? And we never have that challenge with the superintendents anyway, right? We're not on that side of the spectrum. Part of what I think is so fascinating about this research, if I was listening and I was a leader and dealing with all these challenges, I might hear some of this and be like, yes, I want more positivity, more connection, but we immediately see the challenges that are in front of us, or we want to see that there's results. Like if I was talking, I'm working with several coaches in professional and college sports, and they want to hear, what percentage more games are we going to win if we start to implement this, right? And I think that that's another component as well, because you have multiple roles. You're supporting the students there, but you're also trying to raise the test scores and make sure that the parents are happy and feeling like they're engaged in the midst of all of this. Two things I think are crucial to highlight in these incredible stories from Joel and Lisa is that Joel is in one of the poorest counties in Iowa. So we didn't come into a place that, you know, everything was working great. And then if people are happier, they do a little bit better, right? What we were finding was that as we were bringing this in, and some of these scores are change or depending on how you're talking about them, but the initial status research that were coming out in the wake of the Orange Frog was that the ACT scores improved by 3.5 points in Cardinal. We saw that the literacy score changes were the highest percentage-wise in the entire state. He was named Superintendent of the Year. It's open enrollment, and they were not losing students to other communities. Like, people wanted to be part of this. They were able to attract educators in the midst of this as well. Lisa, I didn't know Flint was in Genesee until I met Lisa, right? And then I found out that we were coming in to bring happiness research into Flint. My reaction as a parent, not knowing any of this information, would be, we'll start talking about happiness when you get the lead out of the water. We'll start talking about happiness when the jobs return and there's not racism within the system, right? Which I have so much sympathy for that, but it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. There's an order of operations that when we forget, we can't actually solve those. There's no way to solve any of those challenges if we don't believe our behavior matters, if we're not connected, if we're not optimistic. And what we found is it's things that sounded so paltry, maybe almost even insultingly paltry, that would be a completely different talk. Insultingly paltry in the midst of this, like, think of 3 things you're grateful for. In the midst of racism and inequality and discrimination, what we find is that when your mind shifts to a growth mindset, when it becomes more positive, you reap this advantage that makes you more resilient and powerful, and your scores improve in the midst of that challenging environment. It's not that the environment doesn't change. It doesn't mean that we don't need to do outer work. What we're finding is that the inner work sustained the outer work in the midst of this, which is exactly what we've seen as we've worked with volunteers from Habitat for Humanity, the same thing we've seen within prison systems. What we find is that when we change the mindset, the behaviors change. When the behaviors change, that's when we see those long-term solutions that we wanted. What we learned, and in Flint, let me give one other example of this to give some of the details, because I would want to know some of the statistics. Not only did the ACT scores improve, the literacy rates, we went up post working with Joel, which I think even in the fact that they've been doing this for 7 years, right, is extraordinarily unique. That is not a flavor of the month like my mom was worried about. We came in and worked with Superintendent Andy DeRoss up in Schaumburg, SD 54. They were doing okay compared to Lisa and Joel. Right? They were at the 83rd academic percentile, relatively affluent culture. They got a flood of influx of students, a third of them on the free lunch program. So they thought the academic scores would change, and that's when we came in with this. But instead of working just with the educators, we were able to bring the Orange Frog into the classrooms. And then we did parent universities where the parents and guardians would come up to the school, learn the habits, and come home. Because as we worked with, my mom would be like, I'm doing a great job as a teacher. But they come home to a family that's not loving them like I love them. Right. And I can't control that. So it's easy to give up if you feel like you're the only one. So they brought them and got them on the same wavelength. So they were doing the positive habits at home. The administrators were doing it, and the educators are doing it. So everyone's kind of on the same wavelength. What they found was, instead of dipping their academic scores, they went up to the top, they were at the 95th percentile, and then now top 2% for the nation. But you can still have a school with amazing test scores. And we've got all that data and all of that to support it if you decide to do it within a school district. You can still have a failing school district if your emotional scores are terrible, right? If your depression rates are sky high, anxiety rates are sky high, which we've seen in places even like at Harvard. And what we found is we decided at SD54 to track not only the test scores to keep the momentum going, we tested everything else as well. We tested the emotional side. What we found is depression rates with the same inventory dropped by 30% in a 3-year period of time, which in and of itself would be just stunning. But we also found that the calls to 911 centers for the entire community dropped by 50%. Disciplinary actions dropped nearly in half. What we kept finding over and over again was that this was impacting not just the test scores, this was impacting the mindset of the individuals that were there and why someone would want to go to those schools. Now, as we work with these Orange Frog schools, we've been talking, because I'm in Texas now, and I'm working with some of these schools that are dealing with these teacher shortages. And I would say the majority of the people I talk to that have done the Orange Frog, they're like, we don't have that problem because the teachers want to come here versus the other schools because there's something different about those schools. So I think there's multiple ways that change occurs. We can see data that, like, if you eat the right olive oil, you're going to be healthier. That might change you if you know your friends are getting it and it's easy for you to buy that at the store, right? You have to get all those elements together. You have to have the data, the emotion, and you have to make it easy and a ritual. what we find is that the Orange Frog was able to do that, and we use the data to sustain it on the backside of it. And what we're seeing is not only do the test scores improve, but previous research we found the creativity scores rise nearly triple on problem-solving tasks when somebody becomes more positive as opposed to negative, neutral, or stressed. Intelligence rises, memory improves, the likelihood of finding a job, keeping job rises dramatically. We know we love our, I mean, when we lose teachers, we lose them because they're not happy, right? Or they think they'll be happy somewhere else. So whether we realize it or not, because I keep seeing superintendents and I'm like, I don't want your job. Like, that is so hard. The stuff that you deal with, I would bring home every day and I would not be able to let go of it. So I don't know how all of you do it, but if that's because I see it as a crisis management leadership role, right? But what I think is so beautiful about this is that there's this other element to it where you can actually flip it around and see it as this entire approach of getting people to believe that their behavior matters, right? And that optimism is extraordinarily contagious, and that you're not in this alone. We're doing this with other people. So I think that there's something really powerful about bringing all these elements together and shifting from a deficit mindset to a growth mindset. And that when we shift that first, then comes social emotional learning, and then comes the changes we need within our education system.
No, I think that's incredibly powerful. And I think, you know, Joel is a great example as a sitting superintendent right now. And I think the work, and you mentioned Andy in Schaumburg, and I've had conversations with him about this as well, and it makes a difference. And I think one of the things that's top of mind, and you touched on it a bit, Shawn, and I'm asked us to go a little deeper. But one of the things that's top of mind for superintendents around the country is the teacher shortage. And it's been written about widely. I've seen words like catastrophic. I've talked to superintendents in some large systems who started the year with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of unfilled openings. And so I think how this work can be helpful. Obviously, we have to attract folks, but we have to start by keeping the great folks we have. And so I think your work around culture and mindset is important. So why don't we talk about that a little bit more, because I know that's important for our leaders around the country.
Yes. And I forgot what I was saying halfway through that last comment, which actually leads as an answer to this one. I was saying I saw superintendent roles as crisis management, but really what I wanted to say was, what I realize now is that they're actually in the happiness business just like me, because their goal is to improve the social emotional well-being of their students and their educators, so the educators will stay longer and do a better job, and the students will learn more, right? So instead of being crisis management, it was actually about positivity. And that's exactly what we saw with the labor shortages. Let me pull it outside of education for a moment to give you another piece of research on this. We looked at very small interventions. We want to see how small things have big implications. I think when we see the big problems, we assume there has to be a huge solution to it as well, with billion-dollar tags on it, which sometimes we need that. We need to change the system as well. But when we do that, we wait, because there's no way I'm going to create a multi-billion-dollar change to any programs or systems. What we underestimate, and Lisa even mentioned this, is that we underestimate the value of the small changes. At LinkedIn, in a peer-to-peer praise program, what we got people to do within a system is we incentivize them giving a piece of praise to a peer. So not even top down. We're talking about peer-to-peer praise. Took 2 minutes to write a nice note, basically. It was a nice email or text message that the person receives. But we could track it. That's why we did it through the system. Post my talks, that's one of the things we have people do afterwards, is they write a 2-minute positive email praising or thanking one person in their life. If you want to test out this research, if you actually want to do something, you're like, I really wanted something practical to do after the session, this is it. Go write a 2-minute positive email praising or thanking one person that's not on your favorites list, and do it for a different person each day for the next 21 days in a row. If you're able to do this, you're a weirdo, because we can get you to do this for 8 days, but after 8 days, almost no one does it unless we pay you $15. But if you do it, it turns out your social connection score rises to the top 15% of people worldwide, which is extraordinary. But that simple act activates 21 people in your ecosystem, enhancing it as well. Here's what we found on LinkedIn. If someone received 3 touch points of praise over a 6-month period of time, the new hire retention rate went from 80% to 94%. Same pay, same building, same challenges, same economy, a 14% increase in the retention rate with 3 touch points of praise, which literally took 6 minutes. We found a 3-minute change changed how that person viewed the entire culture. 3 touch points changed the entire culture, resulting in something that was extraordinarily measurable, which is the impact of retention rates. LinkedIn got very excited about that because they know how many millions of dollars that's worth to them. What I got excited about is somebody receives 3 touch points of praise. If you look at the system, on average, they double the amount of praise that they give back into the system. So that person suddenly becomes somebody who's not doing anything to somebody who's actually praising and increasing the system. So what you get is a culture that's shifted towards praise because that's what people do. This becomes the norm. So suddenly something that seemed extraordinarily easy, where they were thinking about how do we get people to stay at LinkedIn? Let's pay them more, right? Let's get doggy daycare. Let's get these huge systems going, right? Like we've got to figure out housing. They need to do all that. Maybe not the doggy daycare, but they need to do all that. But what they were finding was that the 6 minutes was having the biggest effect of anything that they were doing. Yes. So if I heard that, and we have so many of these stories, and there's so many resources that are free and online. If you Google, my name's Shawn Achor, A-C-H-O-R. I write for the Harvard Business Review. Those are all, or at least for the first 3 articles, they're free. And I think if you search for them the right way in Google, they're all free behind the paywall. So there's free articles describing this research of what we've been doing, including that LinkedIn article, that are already done that you can use to persuade educators, teams, parents, boards to get on board with this. I have a free TED Talk as well that goes through some of these different elements. And the reason I'm mentioning those is that the goal of this research was to persuade people to make positive change. And when we find this data, we're hopeful that people will then write a 2-minute positive email praising or thanking someone. So you've heard all this research. So the question is, would you actually do this for the next 21 days in a row? When we find that leaders do this, what's incredible is they become these champions for this this movement that Lisa and Joel and Andy and Aaron Sadoff and all these incredible superintendents are now, in addition to their job, being champions of this research and this change because they've seen what happens in their life.
That's amazing. Lisa, as we it is amazing. And Lisa, as you think about this in your work and the work and how this can impact our ability to retain our staff, what have you seen and what do you recommend?
We did credit the cultural change to the principals of Orange Frog at the Genesee ISD, and we were able to not only retain our staff, we attracted so many new individuals, and not only individuals, teachers, support staff, administrators, but programs. Throughout the state of Michigan, our Michigan Department of Ed looked at us as an ISD of excellence and offered us millions and millions of dollars in grants because of the positive reputation that we had gained. And so over time, we ended up with $100 million more in grant funding opportunities given to us because of the positive culture and reputation that we had developed. So we were retaining our staff, we were attracting staff because of the culture that we had developed. And what happens is word of mouth is extremely powerful and your reputation is powerful. So you retain, you attract not only people, but programs, because people want to be a part of things that are positive. And they come and they stay because they feel important, they feel cared for, they feel connected to their peers. And the other really important thing, Paul, is you select people to be a part of your organization. You don't hire any longer, you select. And there are a ton of gatekeepers around that don't want negativity. They want people who are like-minded to them inside of the organization.
I think the thing you're talking about in and of itself is just truly amazing. But then when you layer it on where you were actually doing this work and the enormous challenges you were facing, I mean, that just tells a moving story. And I think, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for the work, and thank you for the difference you made by taking on this work with so many folks in such a difficult time.
It was a complete team effort.
Wow.
Complete team effort.
I would just like to to add to Paul, and retention continues to be a challenge in my rural school, partly because of salary schedules. But we were fully, all of our teacher hires were hired in June, so we were excited about that. But one of the things that I really believe is just kind of this thought that happiness is good for people and it's good for business, and we have a ton of outcomes to show that. But what I think Shawn really mentioned here, what I like, is that I feel like in my time, and there's many superintendents that have been in this business longer than me, is that we probably are at a point where we as instructors know how to teach reading better than ever before. We have all the strategies in the world. And we spend a lot of time on building technical skills of our staff and our teachers, which we should. But I think one of the things that one of the places I've understood the power of culture and how culture is the next frontier for school improvement, I think those are the ones that are really going to be positioned to do great things in the next 10 years. Happiness work is investing in people. It helps them be better teachers. It helps them be better people. It helps them be more successful professionally and personally. And I think that's the thing that I understand is that, as Shawn always says, happiness is an advantage. And the more we understand how do we infuse that into all the work that we do with our staff at school, I think is going to be the game changer. During that No Child Left Behind years, it was all technical skills. It was how to teach this better and how to do that better. And it was all good things. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have done that. But now, how can we improve culture? Because we know that if we improve culture and infuse happiness, all those things will naturally get better. And I would say that when you look at our outcomes, we didn't start off thinking we were going to do all these things with open enrollment dollars. We didn't think we were going to pass a bond in our community, but we decided, hey, this guy who wrote this book, we're gonna trust him and believe in his research, and let's see what happens. And we did it, and now it's become who we are and what we do. And I think that's the powerful thing. And it just makes things better. And I don't know how else to say that. So I just appreciate it. Let me jump in there.
Yeah. I think your trust was very, very well placed, Joel. So
yes.
I think that's great. So so as we transition, Shawn, I think another area quickly I'd like to talk about is just how this work can impact our individual leaders. You know, we have leaders that are struggling with health issues and many other issues. And when our leaders struggle, we know our organization struggles. So I think your work can really be informative as we're really trying to urge our leaders to take care of themselves, really the heart of the live well and lead well focus. So what do you have to share with us in that area?
I think you're absolutely right. The change has to come at every level of the organization, but there's a unique role played by the people who are joining us here today. There's an incredible psych study and social psych that was done where they have a room full of people who are at a company of leaders, and they have negative or positive negative information come into the room, and they have the negative information come into one person, and the person either delivers it or they deliver the negative information verbally to the whole room. What happens when you videotape the room receiving the negative information is everyone's eyes flick to the most senior leader in the room, whoever he or she is, right? So they flick and then they change their nonverbal. So if the nonverbal of the leader in the room, who we had already primed, either was defensive, hunker down, this is another crisis we're dealing with, versus we're going to solve this, we've got the capabilities, we have the resources, I'm confident in this situation, the nonverbals cascade out around them. And I think that that's such a crucial reminder that people are going to be looking to you to see, how do we respond? Is this a crisis-filled world, or is this a world where when we work together, we're making change one step at a time? So in order to make that happen, given the challenges we're experiencing, everything from health to our emotions, I think it starts coming back to that order of operations, which is my theme for today after my thoughts last night, is it starts with the most simple things. We know that we can change the neural pathways in your brain when we do MRI scans. If we get you to go meditate on a mountainside for about 80 days, we can literally see the pathways change. You will lose your job and the entire
okay, so there's a downside.
Yes, there is one downside. So obviously that can't be our solution. So our solutions have to be extraordinarily simple, usable things that you can do. When we work with NASA, We have them do the gratitude intervention that, Paul, you've been using as you go around speaking as well. We have them scan for 3 new things that they're grateful for that have occurred over the past 24 hours. So they have to be new. If you say, I'm grateful for my work, my family, and my health, that actually doesn't work. That's rote. It's a different part of the brain. It actually has to be activating the part of the brain that scans. So the astronauts, while they brush their teeth, which was a habit that they already had, would scan for 3 new things that they were grateful for. That simple act not only improved their effectiveness, but when we've seen it within Wall Street bankers, with educators, with students, we find that if you do that for a period of 21 days in a row, your brain somewhere in that 21-day period of time takes a shortcut and builds a background neural app that scans your world for the things that are positive, instead of sending it to basically a spam filter in your brain. This is passive. So without doing anything, this simple act of every day at the same time, maybe when you first get into your office, on your drive, at the same red light, while you brush your teeth, if you want to be like an astronaut, you think of 3 new things you're grateful for. Now, your brain is going to scan for threats all day long, and those threats will remain. But what's happening is in the midst of the threats, your brain will also be processing the positive, which means it's scanning for them. So what we find is that people's levels of optimism, regardless of whether they start at low levels of pessimism or moderate levels of optimism, their scores start to improve on the optimism scale. Small at first for 21 days, it continues once you get to the 6-month period and for the 2-year period as well. So it continues just like if you continue brushing your teeth. That simple change changes your leadership, your nonverbals when you hear information, how you process information, and how people see you when they flick their eyes at you, looking for their nonverbal response to how are we going to deal with this. That happens not only as superintendents, that happens as parents as well, right? This happens for our educators. So that simple act of doing it is incredibly powerful. Doing it with other people changes everything. So you're not the only one doing this. Wow. It's like you're part of a book club, or you're doing it like as an accountability partner, or somebody that you work out with at a gym, or somebody you're in a Bible study with. That idea of making sure you're doing it with other people changes everything. The CFO of Nationwide Insurance told me he was actually doing this when he came into his office. I was like, that's great. Have you told people you're doing it? And he realized as a leader, he hadn't told anyone that's what he does. So he got on Yammer, their internal social media, and he told everyone, what makes me successful and makes me this positive leader is every day when I come into work, I write down 3 new things I'm grateful for. In fact, here are my 3 for today, and popped in occasionally to do it as well. What happens is when people see that leader, they see that leader not only as identified as somebody who's positive, but then they're more likely to pick up that habit as well, right? Same thing when we model it for our kids. So something as simple post a session like this one is not, here's how you go get more funding, or let's go meditate on a mountainside. I would love you for at one time of the day for the next 21 days road to scan for 3 new things you're grateful for. The research on this is stunning. We have 3 decades worth of research, all trending in this change to your optimism score above your genetic threshold. Writing a 2-minute positive email takes that gratitude and makes it external, which means you're building social connection, which is the greatest predictor of your long-term levels of happiness. If somebody did 2 things post this, those were the 2 things I would suggest: a 2-minute positive email to a different person each day, and the gratitude. But one last one, I know that health is also an issue for our superintendents because they work so hard and the stress levels are so high. We see it with the nurses we work with, right? That their weight balloons in the midst of the stresses that they're dealing with, and pandemic drinking as well, right? All of this. The antidepressant companies, when they test antidepressants, they test it compared to a placebo, which is simply mindset, which we've already covered, or they test it compared to an exercise category. The exercise category is 4 to 5 times a week going on a 15-minute brisk walk. They find for the first 6 months that doing that, a brisk walk for 4 to 5 times a week for 15 minutes, is the equivalent of taking the strongest tier of antidepressants we have. So wow. That's for the first 6 months. For the next 2 years, you have a 30% lower relapse rate back to depression, because now you've created an entire constellation of positive habits in your life. That walk that seemed like it was nothing turned into a starter drug for your brain. And what we're finding is not only did it have an antidepressant impact, but also that walk becomes something you're known for, or that you can bring family members on, or maybe you do with some other leaders, right? Maybe you even do a couple of your calls. I have a couple of calls I do walking with people. They're in different states, right? What's amazing about this is that those small things, a walk, gratitude, and an email, create some of the biggest changes we've seen within the systems and led to all of those incredible outcomes. It's the root of the changes you hear from Lisa and Joel.
And that is powerful. That is amazing. And I think you're right. I think that walking thing, I actually heard that. And during the pandemic, all the phone calls I had to make, I started doing that.
Awesome.
And it made a huge, it is a huge difference. I didn't think I had time to walk until someone told me you got time to walk. You're on the phone all the time. Go walk. Simple things can have a great impact. So we are coming to the end of our hour together. And so how I'd like to bring this to a close before I make some final comments is I'd like to give each of you a time just to share any final words with our superintendents. And Lisa, I'm going to give you the opportunity to go first, and then Joel, and then Shawn, I'll give you the final word, but certainly appreciate all three of you. And this has been incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. So
Sure.
Lisa, why don't you kick us off on this final round?
Thank you, Paul. Well, I just wanted to say something we all know, but just a good reminder is that the leaders, the superintendents play such a powerful role in the district. I mean, they set the tone, and it can't be understated how important of a role those individuals are. Oftentimes, and it's so important, they are the voice of the rational optimism in every situation that they find themselves in. And oftentimes now it's in a public arena. And these strategies help them maintain that calm sense of optional rationalism in a public place. And as Shawn said, sometimes these strategies really help you keep your mind grounded and your body in a positive mindset. When Shawn referred to praise a few minutes ago, his book, Big Potential, is so powerful in helping a leader frame praise and give you strategies on praise. I loved Happiness Advantage, but I can so strongly recommend that Big Potential book. When you're leading a group, it takes you to a new level. And so I want to remind everyone listening that your mindset matters so much, and you have the ability to impact the mindset of all those around you by your actions every day and establishing opportunities for people to share good news by how you're structuring your meetings and opportunities. And you have the power to force them to share gratitudes or do gratitudes just by how you're structuring your agendas and things. It's sometimes not an opportunity. You can set these routines in your meetings and things. And that all the world's problems in your districts or in your buildings are not on your shoulders. You have good people around you, and you really need to use your social connections and your teams together to further the mission of your district. And I want to thank everyone again for their work with the children. So thank you again.
Thanks
for
a
this
lot.
opportunity.
Thank you, Lisa. Joel?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I just want to say thanks for being here. I'm honored to be with Lisa and Shawn. And one of the things that we know is that happiness is contagious. The challenge is that negativity is also contagious, and we see this in our workplaces. We see this in our schools, and when we understand the things that are coming at us. But the research is clear. A few small changes make big differences. So my encouragement to everyone listening today is to learn more about positive psychology, learn more about Shawn's research, reach out and learn more about the Orange Frog. It's made a huge difference in our work. It's made our people more productive and more happy, and I think it's rippled out into their personal lives too, which is really powerful too for some of them that have had challenges outside of our doors. And so just want to say thanks to everyone out there for the work that you're doing. You're making a huge difference in the lives of our kids and our teachers, and stay strong, and the best is yet to come.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it, Joel. And Shawn?
I feel like everything's been said. My hope is that people don't leave the session being like, oh, I feel a little bit more positive. I hope you do something. So if I was trying to structure what would happen post the session to make it the most valuable use of your time, is immediately write a 2-minute positive email praising or thanking someone in your life. Watch the ripple effect and the return on that investment, and do it for a couple of days in a row. The second thing I'm going to do is we have that free TED Talk that describes this research. That is a great way to kick off a meeting. It's free. It's 12 minutes long. So it saves you 12 minutes. It's things people have used in assembly, they've used it in high school classes, but without having to do anything but press play on your side, you could get some of this information out so that you're not doing it alone. And the reason I'm mentioning that is not so I get one more click on my TED Talk, but because we know that the mountain in front of you, that hill, collapses. It's much less steep when you realize you're not alone, you're doing it with other people. And people start to perceive you as the type of person who emails out or shows a positive TED Talk. And then finally, if you like this, or you want to explore this, or you're a skeptic, wherever you are on the spectrum, I would encourage you to Google Orange Frog Schools, or maybe they'll provide a link to find out. They have public workshops you could just attend yourself to get something out of it, but also to see it, but also maybe to be able to think about how you might be able to do this with just your leadership team. Because what we find is when we do it with a leadership team, it spreads like wildfire afterwards because everyone wants to be part of it. So I would start with you and then expand it out to other people, and then maybe explore doing something more systemic.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Lisa and Joel and Shawn, I just want you to know that today you've inspired me and you've also challenged me. And I think both of those things are important. And Shawn, I will sit down and write that email as soon as we're done, because I think taking action is important. And after we learn something new, let's put it into practice right away. And so thank you for taking the time to be with all of us and to sharing your wisdom and your passion. I really believe that these principles and these concepts and this research can make a difference in our public schools around the country. And I love our public school leaders. Thank you for all you are doing. You are appreciated. You are loved. And the work you're doing matters. And I am so thankful for each of you. So thanks again for joining us today. Thanks again to Lisa, Joel, and Shawn for making such a difference. And remember to live well and lead well. Thank you.